Alright folks, what you have just observed is the way we think the continents may have sorted themselves out starting from 550 million years ago to the present. We'll go back and look at that more in today's online lecture. So as you can see, we have been moving around quite a bit. The theory of plate tectonics is well established and has been supported by very large amounts of evidence. We also typically refer to plate tectonics, or one of the phenomena related to plate tectonics is continental drift. And we're going to look at how the drifting of the continents, as you know, we are on the crust, and the continents are basically part of the crust, including the ocean floor. And all these plates of large pieces of Earth's crust, this outer part, kind of like the skin of the Earth, if you will, is floating on the liquid mantle, or semi-liquid mantle. And so, in fact, right now, as we speak, here in North America, we are drifting to the west. And Europe is drifting the other direction, more toward the east. So guess what? The Atlantic Ocean is increasing in size. And we are drifting toward China and Japan. And so the Pacific Ocean is actually getting smaller each year, but by a very small amount. I think over 100 years, I think it's like an inch maybe. So the Atlantic Ocean grows by about an inch every 100 years, and the Pacific decreases by an inch every 100 years. So, you know, nothing dramatic. But anyway, guys, think about that. We are moving as we speak at a very small amount, nothing we would even notice. But that interesting occurrence, the fact that we are drifting, I know it's a very large scale. We're talking about millions and millions of years to truly experience dramatic changes in the locations of the continents. Will definitely, and this phenomenon will definitely affect the distribution of where organisms live. So the reason we're talking about continental drift and plate tectonics here in biology is we think it's had a significant impact on the distribution of organisms. And what's the distribution? It's where organisms live. In fact, biogeography is the study of the geographic distribution of extinct and living species. We examine why do certain species live in certain areas? Why are they not found in other areas? Like, why do we only find kangaroos in Australia? Interesting question. And you should think about that. And you should always question and wonder, when you see an organism that's unique to an area, ask yourself, why only there? Like, why are moose only in the far north? Why are polar bears restricted to Arctic areas? Why are black bear only in the eastern and western parts of our state, but not in the central? So ask those kinds of questions, and as you think about those things, I guarantee you will become much more engaged in this topic. So evolution and geology are very important, and we think the geology, the plate tectonics, and continental drift has dramatically affected the evolution of species. And as we look at how geology has affected the evolution of species, that will help us understand this biogeography, why organisms live where they live. So look at some examples of what we might look or notice here in the subject of biogeography. So, South America, Africa, Australia. Most people believe that these three continents were one continent called Gondwana. And so organisms could go back and forth between South America, Africa, and Australia because it was essentially one large continent. And even today, they're similar because they're all in the southern hemisphere, and they have very similar biomes. Like, folks, they have tropical areas. There are tropical areas in all three of these continents. And there are temperate areas in these three continents, meaning there are actual seasons like what we have here in North America, in North Carolina specifically, and North America as well. But they have different animals. They have similar biomes but different animals. Like in South America, we have the sloth, the anteater, the armadillo, monkeys with prehensile tails, tails that can wrap around branches. Africa, though, we find antelope, zebras, giraffes, lions, baboons, okapis, and aardvarks. And then Australia, we have mainly the marsupials. In fact, basically every native animal, or I suppose maybe more specifically, every native mammal in Australia is a marsupial, with the exception of some bats. So why is every native mammal to Australia a marsupial and not a placental? You gotta wonder about that. Kangaroos, koala bears, Tasmanian devils, wombats, monotremes, including platypus and echidna. What's up with that? You gotta wonder. They have similar biomes, but why do they have such different animals? They were actually one continent at one time. Well, how long has it been since these three continents broke up? A long time ago. You'll see in the graphic that I'll show you in the video, it was at least 65 million years ago. In fact, it was probably more than that, according to most biologists and geologists, that these continents have been separated for at least that long. That gives you lots of time for organisms to possibly go different directions. So let's go ahead now and move a little further along. Let's not forget about the plant life. Plant life differs on different continents as well. For example, we only find pine trees pretty much in central Mexico and north. And then south of central Mexico, like South America and most of Central America, you find palm trees. We don't really find a lot of pines down there. Plant life is extremely diverse. We have all kinds of different cacti in Africa, Australia, and South America. So it's both plant and animal life that differs greatly as we go across continents. We'll find that certain plants only live in certain areas. So the conclusion is different floras and faunas are the result of independent evolution of separate unconnected populations, which have generated different species in different places. So the conclusion, according to this textbook, according to this perspective and what we've been talking about here, is all the plants and animals that we see on these different continents, like the zebra in Africa and like the sloth in South America, are the result of independent evolution of very separate, unconnected populations because these continents have been split for so long. The longer two populations are geographically separated, the longer their DNA will become, or their DNA will become more and more different. Okay? So imagine if we had, okay, here's the before picture at the top. So we have one population of squirrels. And then we start to see a little stream form down here in the middle. Maybe it starts getting wetter, climatic changes, right? That happens all throughout Earth's history. Finally, we get this big, thick river, like the Mississippi River now. Now the two populations, or the original population of squirrels, has been fragmented into two, population A, population B. Population A is going to experience different mutations than population B. They could experience similar ones, but the DNA is not made of steel. It mutates, it changes. New mutations will pop up in population A, new mutations will pop up in population B, and those mutations will result in different traits. And the different environments on the east and west bank of the river could cause certain traits to become more prevalent. Like maybe over here on the east bank, over here in population A, maybe it's a little darker over here. Maybe the background is a little darker. Over here in population B, it's lighter. So you might start seeing coat color getting darker in the population A and lighter coat color in population B. Eventually, these two species can become very different from each other. Of course, that's just a very simple demonstration of how evolution can occur independently in two different populations. Imagine continents splitting and an ocean being between for millions of years. Now you see how organisms can become quite different and why we might see different organisms on different continents. Okay? Even if you don't totally believe in all this, guys, because I know some of us don't, just from an intellectual standpoint, follow the logic here anyway, okay? Just kind of follow the logic because that's what you'll need to do for the test. So let's go on to slide 70. Continental drift. So in continental drift, we have slow movement of the Earth's surface plates. The plates, again, are not just land masses. They can be the oceans as well. And we have very distinct plates and very distinct plate boundaries. Like we have the North American plate. We have the Pacific plate. And the North American and the Pacific plate are rubbing against each other. And this creates earthquakes and a giant fault, the San Andreas Fault in California. So one plate, I think it's the Pacific, is drifting, let's see, North American plate is drifting to the west. No, I'm sorry, we're drifting to the east because the Atlantic Ocean is getting, no, the Atlantic Ocean is getting bigger. Let me think about, I'm sorry guys, it's been a while since I had my geology. Yeah, the North American plate is indeed moving west. And the Pacific plate is moving a little bit to the east and south, and there's a rubbing that happens, and that friction has created a big crack, the San Andreas Fault, and there are a lot of earthquakes there. Where we have plates smash into each other, like we have in the Indian Ocean plate, slams into the Asian plate, and that creates the Himalaya Mountains. So you can see where the plate boundaries are, because you'll find a mountain range there, or you'll find a fault line. In some areas, like in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, we have two plates moving away from each other. So we have the North American plate moving to the west, and then in Europe there's, and the rest of the Atlantic Ocean on the other side is moving away. So there's a crack that occurs because two plates are moving away from each other. And if you have two plates moving away from each other, there's a little sort of a crack, and there's magma that comes out, lava, and that creates the Mid-Atlantic Ocean ridge. So that big ridge in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean as a result of two plates moving away from each other, just like if you pulled your skin apart, it'll create a rip. And then blood comes out. Well, instead of blood coming out, it's magma, it's lava deep in the Atlantic Ocean, you see? So we have plenty of evidence for this drift. Relative location of the land masses on Earth has changed enormously over time as a result. I was giving you some examples of the present time, but there's been tremendous change. Again, you're going to see this very well when we look back at the video. This explains occurrences of similar species in plants and animals, fossils, in South America, Africa, India, Antarctica, and Australia. Like we do find very similar species in especially South Africa, or South America, Africa, and Australia, because we think that these three continents were actually connected. And if you go far back enough, all the continents were probably joined together in one supercontinent called Pangaea. So we had original one continent, Pangaea, which breaks up before most of our modern day organisms are even around at all. And then we see Gondwana split off, which includes South America, Australia, and Africa, and then that splits. So when we look back at like Triassic reptiles like Lystrosaurus and Cyanognathes, we see that they were found in all of these continents, and these were large reptiles, folks, that could not swim. Yet they're found in South America, Africa, and Australia, and even some of these others like India and Antarctica. So how could these large reptiles have been in these three different continents if they were separated by large amounts of ocean water? There's no way these Triassic reptiles, Lystrosaurus and Cyanognathes, could have swam. They must have been able to move around, so they were connected, you see? The fossil fern Glossopteris, that's a fern that was found all throughout these continents. And we find fossils in Antarctica, which has very little life. Absolutely, Antarctica used to be much further north. So it was more of a temperate continent. It actually had seasons. It had lots of animal and plant life, and then it drifted to the south and got colder and colder and colder. You see, guys, we have plenty of evidence to show that the biogeography of the world has changed a lot. The distribution of plants and animals has abruptly changed. And why? Because of continental drift. And of course, evolution working along with that. That's what we would make that claim. How about flightless birds? The current distribution of the ratites, pretty much a group of almost all flightless birds, is in the southern hemisphere as a result of continental drift. Like we have ostriches in Africa, emus in Australia, rheas in South America. So when Gondwana, the giant southern continent, split apart, these genera evolved separately, and they're not actually all that related. You might think ostriches, emus, rheas will be really similar. They're genetically quite different. Remember, they would have been separated for many millions and millions of years. So the common ancestor in Gondwana would have been split up, and then 65 plus million years of separation, you have these three. So that's an example of the kind of thing that we would see in biogeography. What's this thing called disjunct distributions? It's widely separate populations of related species. The distributions of many species are relics of once broader distributions. So when we look at widely separate populations of related species, this suggests that at one time they had very broad distributions and they were then fragmented as a result of continental drift and changes in climate as a result of continental drift. Not to mention, the global temperatures have changed a lot too, guys. It's not just that continents are drifting around and moving around. We also have huge fluctuations in Earth's historic temperatures. I mean, Earth didn't even have polar ice caps for a long time. And then we think the ice caps extended all the way down into the United States. So there have been times we've been much cooler and much warmer. Here's a great example of a disjunct population or a disjunct distribution. We have 4 living species of tapir, 3 in Central and South America, only 1 in Malaysia. But when we look at fossils, we see that they are widespread. Tapirs lived all over Europe, Asia, and even North America. We think the ancestor of the tapirs, a Paleotapirus, fossils especially, existed in Europe. So we think that the tapirs actually started in Europe. And because of global cooling, the tapirs dispersed to the tropical areas where they live today. 3 in Central and South America, 1 in Malaysia. But the fossil record shows that they were all over Europe, Asia, and North America. And then those places got a lot colder and tapirs got out of there. If you look at the current distribution of tapirs, they just don't like cold. Let's look at a picture of that. So here we have the picture of this would be the Paleotapirus. This would be the ancestor that is no longer alive today. This is the one we have fossils of all over Europe, Asia, and even North America. So Paleotapirus just dispersed all over the world, and then cooling happened. Cold winds out of the north and extensive snowfall, changes in climate create a line where they just don't live further north of, and that would be right about here. So this all becomes way too cold for them up here. And then down here, yes, it becomes too cold down here too. So now they're limited to that narrow band in the middle, the tropics. You see? So we have very similar organism, right? Tapirs, they're very distinct looking. Genetically, they're not that different. Again, the idea of the disjunct population is that they were all related and they became disbanded, and this explains their current distribution, along with continental drift. Okay? So another example would be elephants and camels. Did y'all know that elephants actually lived in North America? Yeah, they left behind all kinds of fossils for us. So we know elephants lived in North America. Most people think the elephants came in across the land bridge. So there was a land bridge that's connected Asia to North America, right across, or right by Alaska, the Bering Strait land bridge. And so elephants were able to cross over from Asia into North America. And then we think camels actually started here in North America. Camels? Yes, camels. We have very old fossils of camels in North America, and we think camels went the other way. So camels crossed the land bridge and went into Asia. And currently they are now found in South America and, of course, the Sahara, the northern Africa, and parts of Asia. Who would have ever thought that? So there have been a lot of changes, and a lot of that has come about because of the availability of things like land bridges that only existed for a while. Alfred Russel Wallace was a person that lived at the same time as Darwin. He was a contemporary of Darwin. In fact, Wallace was coming up with the theory of evolution himself. So had Darwin not come up with it, Wallace would have. And he was in South America, and he was studying plants and animals. And he noticed they're restricted to certain geographic areas. Like Wallace discovered that guinea pigs were only in Central and South America where he was studying. You remember Wallace is an Englishman. He's from Europe. And now he's down in Central and South America in the 1800s, and he's noticing, wow, there's a lot of things that are only here that are not in Europe, like guinea pigs. By the way, people love to eat them. That's a delicacy in Central and South America. Yeah, just real different culture there. They're probably good. Who knows? But basically, Wallace looked at the world's biota as he, examined organisms all across the world. Back in the 1800s, for the first time, we started getting data, if you will, and evidence for different things living in different areas. And he came up with these following major biogeographic regions, which we basically recognize still today. So Wallace did a great job. He's well ahead of his time. The Nearctic, which includes North America. The Palearctic, which includes most of present-day Russia and large parts of Asia. Neotropical, which would be like South America and Central America. Ethiopian, which is basically Africa. Oriental, which is basically Central Asia and getting down and towards places like Malaysia, and then the Australian biogeographic region. Now, all of these biogeographic regions are bounded by major barriers to dispersal. So there's either oceans around the continents, like in the case of Australia, or we have the Himalayas, an extremely high mountain range that separates the Palearctic from the Oriental, and the Sahara Desert, which was a really good barrier between the Ethiopian and points northward. So let's look at pictures of these biogeographic regions. So in these biogeographic regions, you will find similar plant and animal species, and they're very distinct from each other. So the Nearctic, you can see it is North America, all the way up into Greenland. The Neotropical, again, that actually starts right here in central Mexico and goes southward. Even parts of Florida are considered Neotropical. The Ethiopian, again, you can see the barrier here would be the Sahara Desert. This is all desert Sahara in here. The, oops, sorry guys, let me go back. Sometimes I jump ahead. Okay, there we go. So, oh, I did it again. Let me get my pen out. Here we go. The Palearctic, you can see it's separated by the Himalayas. So right between Palearctic and Oriental, we have a very high mountain range here. And of course, Australia with its water isolation. And then the Oriental, which includes India and South Asia, basically. So you'll find very similar plant animal species within these regions, and they just have a hard time crossing. Like it's rare to find an organism that both lives in the Palearctic and Ethiopian, or Palearctic and Oriental, or Neotropical and Nearctic. And especially things like Australia, again, very isolated down there. All right, so we will end with this, the idea of convergent evolution. So we know that barriers prevent dispersal, and barriers cause populations to become more and more genetically different from each other. However, you will see similar species in these different biogeographic regions. And why would we find similar species? Is it because they're just super related to each other? No, probably they just simply live in similar environments. They evolved from different taxonomic ancestors, yet they became very similar because they live in similar environments. For example, desert rats. All the desert rats are very similar. Kangaroo rats in North America, jerboas in Central Asian deserts, and hopping mice in Australian deserts. They're all very similar. They have a long tail. They can concentrate their urine. They're all about the same size, same color, extremely similar. Is it because they all have a lot of genetic similarity? No. When we do the genetic tests on them, they're very different genetically, but they have lived in similar environments for so long they start to look a lot like each other as they adapt to similar climates. Same is true for different types of ant-eating organisms, like the giant anteater and the spiny echidna, which also eats ants. They both have very similar noses, long sticky tongues to eat ants, but they're not genetically very similar at all. Flightless birds like ostriches, emus, rheas, they are not all that genetically similar, but they are all similar in the sense they are flightless, they have long legs, they're very fast, sometimes aggressive, right? All these things, very fast runners, because they all live in similar environments and have similar lifestyles. And so if you have two unrelated organisms living in very similar climates, you'll have something called convergent evolution, and their similar traits are called analogous structures. Analogous. So that's the long pointy nose and sticky tongue of the anteater and the spiny echidna, they are there because of similar feeding preferences. And so that's an analogous structure. The similar long tail of the kangaroo rat, jerboas, and hopping mice, that is all an example of analogous traits. Contrast that with homologous traits. Homologous traits are traits that are similar because of ancestry, similar ancestry. Like, for example, guys, let's just take this into the human world. Let's say you have a similar, I don't know, nose to somebody else. And the reason you have that similar nose to this other person is that you're related. It's your brother or your sister. Of course your noses might be similar looking because you both have parents that are the same parents. You have the same parents. You have genetic relatedness, so you wind up with similar noses. But how about in the Olympics when you see two athletes that are completely unrelated but they look similar because they're both training for the exact same event? That would be kind of like convergent evolution. They're not related, but they have similar traits because they're doing similar things, right? Like all the gymnasts start kind of looking the same. If you look at those little girl gymnasts, they start to all kind of look similar because they have similar builds because they've been doing similar exercises. It's not exactly the same because we're talking more about an evolutionary thing here, but you kind of get the idea. It's environment that shapes them. They're not related. All right, guys. This will just about wrap things up. We are at the end of the PowerPoint, but I would like to show you the rest of that video. So let's go ahead and look at the way we think the plates have drifted through the years. So let's go ahead and watch this. Again, we're going to look at it's going to go fast the first time, then it's going to slow down. And I want you to think about some of the things we discussed in today's online lecture as you watch these plates move. Notice how some plates are moving much further north, right? It's going to get a lot colder on that continent. Or if they move really far south. Notice the mountain ranges forming and disappearing. Oceans separating continents. Well, there's one big continent. Notice the time here. not even in the age of the dinosaurs yet here. We won't hit dinosaurs until about 260. There's a separation that's no longer there. Okay, now we're just starting the dinosaur era right about here. Definitely in the middle of the dinosaur era now. That's the separation happening between some of the continents. Now we're getting into the middle of the dinosaur era. Now you're starting to see the breakup of Gondwana. There, that's still Gondwana there, but look, oh, there we go. There's the breakup of Gondwana. It was actually over 100 million years ago, where Australia, Africa, and South America have broken up now. Okay, now we get to the end of the dinosaur era is over now. That was 65 million, the KT event. And there's South America coming together. Notice the separation between North and South America. And notice how it's starting to join and how we're drifting away from Europe. Pretty cool, guys. Really will explain a lot that we observe in the fossil record and in what we observe even in our modern present-day organisms. Well, guys, if you have any questions for me, please email me at mspath@wpcc.edu or simply bring your questions to class, where I will see you next.